Welcome back. New Mexico has some of the richest multicultural history in the world. Our story begins with the presence of New Mexico's original settlers, Native Americans, thousands of years ago. Today, we take a moment to share some of the rich history and sites of our state's long history of Native Americans across centuries. We're joined this morning by our good friend, historian Rafi Andonian, to tell us a little bit more. Rafi, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome back. Always so much fun having you on the show. Now, you were on in the last hour with David talking about the same subject. So for viewers at home that are just tuning in now, give us a little bit of a recap.
Well, remember that local Native American history goes back 2,500 years, and it's important to remember that because, we think of sort of the ancient civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome, and I get it, I'm part Greek, I get it. But in that same time period, you have the local American Indian groups that are right here in New Mexico, and they're establishing these massive civilizations as well. And we talked previously more extensively about Chaco Canyon, which is where I would go, the one place I would go to see all of that, to understand just how extensive. It looks like ancient Rome or ancient Greece there if you actually go, because it was such a huge center of power and such dramatic masonry.
Now, how did the United States affect the local Native American history?
Well, what happens along the way, right? You have the Spanish that come influence, and Native American culture here in New Mexico changes to something very unique, which is this amalgamation, this mixture of the two religions, the Native religion and the Catholic religion. And often what we think of there is the conflicts, right? Like, for example, we have the Pueblo Revolt in 1680, a Reconquest after that, or Entrada after that. But when the United States comes in, what happens is alliances shift. Because what's fascinating to understand about history across time, across centuries, is that it's about change over time. So it's not always, I hate you or I like you. These things change, just like diplomacy. And in one of the great examples of that is right in the beginning of the United States acquiring New Mexico as a territory in the late 1840s. What happens is someone named Governor Charles Bent, who might sound familiar, there's still a street named after him in Taos, and both the local Hispanos and the local Indian groups, in that case led by Taos Pueblo, make an alliance against the United States presence, especially the governor's leadership, and they break into his personal home in Taos and scalp him in front of his family, carrying on a revolt, killing other government officials. Eventually, the United States hangs 28 of these men, which kind of puts an end to the revolt. So it gives you an idea of how these things shift. Now, what's fascinating from there is the culture continues to shift for the United States. So, for example, you have shortly after that the Navajo Long Walk, which also includes some Apaches here in New Mexico, who were taken to the Bosque Redondo Reservation at Fort Sumner, which you can still go to at Fort Sumner today. So this stuff is still alive. And there was an attempt in the 1860s to try to assimilate, to kind of change those cultures, to make them more Anglo, if you will. So again, changing over time. And finally, the example I would give that is really valuable is remembering the Indian boarding schools, often known as Indian schools. Because what would happen is in the late 19th and early 20th century, while these attempts by the people implementing it were actually perceived to be good by the folks that were implementing it, because they were trying to do what they thought was a good thing, which is to civilize these folks that they saw as primitive, which is why thinking that way is a little bit dangerous, not understanding the civilizations that were there before. But in the process, what they did was try to change their culture, cut their hair, change their name, change their religion, make them ashamed of where they came from, and even ban their native tongue and languages and make them speak English, which is a great way to try to erase culture. Language is always powerful. You see it all around the world in different areas. That's an attempt that's done in Hawaii, in Louisiana, later on with Spanish being banned here in New Mexico. So these are the ways that, I would say in the United States, the alliances start to shift. And what happens also is the culture starts to change and be, I would say, even more resilient and resistant. That's the culture that develops.
Rafi, where can our viewers go to learn more about this rich history and culture?
I would do it by visiting sites. So some of the ones that come to mind, absolutely, the Chaco Culture National Park. I would go to Fort Sumner, which there is still a historic site that you can go visit. There's actually a Bosque Redondo Memorial there. And I would check out Taos Pueblo also. And right here in Albuquerque, I'd also go to Petroglyph National Monument to get a sense of the ancient cultures.
Very cool. Thanks again, Rafi, so much for being here this morning. For a full recap of the entire interview and more information on our friend Rafi here, you can head to alwayson.krqe.com.